My parents demanded I transfer my small business to my brother because he has a household to maintain, you don't. Then Dad said, hand it to him or cease being our son. I remained silent. The next day I conveyed it to a buyer unknown to them. When my parents appeared with my brother to claim control, they witnessed who was inside and began screaming. I built my small business from the ground up, 8 years of blood, sweat, and ramen noodles. Then my parents looked me in the eye and demanded I hand it all over to my brother because he needed it more. And my dad finished with a chilling ultimatum, give it to him or don't call yourself our son. That was the moment their world and mine changed forever. My name is Jordan. I'm 32 years old. For most of my life I've been the one who showed up, stayed quiet, and handled what nobody else wanted to touch. I built my graphic design studio from the ground up. 8 years of late nights and coffee that tasted like regret and determination mixed together in equal parts. My studio wasn't fancy. It was a converted warehouse space on the east side of town, with exposed brick walls that still had old paint stains from whatever factory used to operate there decades ago. The furniture was second-hand, bought from estate sales and thrift stores. The desk I worked at had scratches across the surface from someone else's life, someone else's work. But it was mine. Every invoice paid, every client earned, every piece of equipment bought with money I saved from freelancing gigs that paid barely enough to cover rent and ramen noodles. My older brother, Michael, was different. He was the golden child, the favorite son who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. When Michael graduated college, my parents threw him a party with 200 guests, a live band that played classic rock covers, and a cake shaped like a briefcase because he was going into business. When I graduated, they sent a card with $50 inside and a note that said, "Proud of you, son," in my mother's looping handwriting. No party, no celebration, just the card, which I kept in a drawer for years before finally throwing it away during a move. When Michael got married to Amanda, my parents paid for the entire wedding at a lakeside resort 3 hours away. There were white tents, string lights, a photographer who charged more than I made in 6 months, and a 7-course dinner that people still talked about years later. When I started dating someone seriously, a woman named Claire who worked at a bookstore and made me laugh until my stomach hurt, my mother asked if I was sure I wanted to settle down so young. She said I had plenty of time, that I should focus on building stability first. Claire and I broke up 6 months later for reasons that had nothing to do with my mother's comment. But I always wondered if the seed of doubt had been planted that day. The pattern was always there, clear as daylight, but invisible to anyone who didn't want to see it. Michael got the attention, the praise, the financial help when he needed it. I got the leftover space at the dinner table. The questions about whether I was doing okay. The assumption that I would figure things out on my own because I always did. I told myself it didn't matter. Family was family. You forgive. You move on. You keep showing up because that's what good people do. Michael had 3 kids now, 2 boys and a girl ages 7, 5, and 2. Their names were Tyler, Connor, and Lily. I bought them birthday presents every year, nice ones, toys they actually wanted instead of educational gifts that sat in closets. Michael worked in sales, or at least that's what he told everyone. His job seemed to change every 6 months like clockwork. One year he sold insurance policies to small businesses. The next year it was real estate, showing houses to people who couldn't afford them. Then it was some kind of consulting thing I never fully understood. Something about helping companies optimize their workflow, which sounded impressive but never seemed to bring in steady money. His wife, Amanda, stayed home with the kids. She was kind, with a soft voice and tired eyes that told stories she never spoke out loud. She smiled when she saw me, always grateful when I showed up with groceries or gift cards to Target. I liked her. I felt sorry for her sometimes, though I couldn't say exactly why. Maybe it was the way she flinched when Michael raised his voice. Maybe it was the way she apologized too much for things that weren't her fault. My parents lived 20 minutes away in the house where I grew up. It was a modest 3-bedroom ranch with beige siding and a backyard that flooded every spring when the snow melted too fast. My father worked in construction for 30 years until his back gave out and the doctors told him he needed surgery he couldn't afford. My mother worked part-time at a dental office, answering phones and scheduling appointments. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable. Comfortable enough to help Michael whenever he asked, which was often. Comfortable enough to never ask me if I needed anything because I guess they assumed I didn't. I visited them once a month for Sunday dinner. I brought wine, usually a bottle of red that cost more than I wanted to spend, but less than what would make me look like I was showing off. I brought dessert, pies from the bakery downtown, or cookies I picked up from the grocery store. I listened to my father talk about the news, about politicians he didn't trust, and weather patterns he found concerning. I listened to my mother talk about the grandkids, about Tyler's soccer games and Connor's reading level and Lily's first words. Michael usually showed up late, 30 or 40 minutes past the time we were supposed to eat, and nobody minded. I usually left early, making up excuses about work deadlines or early morning meetings, and nobody noticed. That was just how it worked. I was the dependable one, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who quietly made things easier for everyone else without asking for credit or recognition. I thought that was what family did. I thought that was love. The conversation started the way most uncomfortable conversations start, with my mother clearing her throat and my father setting down his coffee mug a little too hard on the wooden side table. It was a Sunday in late October. The leaves outside were turning brown and falling in clumps onto the lawn that nobody had raked yet. The house smelled like pot roast and something sour I couldn't place. Maybe old laundry or the garbage that needed to be taken out. Michael sat on the couch next to Amanda, who was bouncing their youngest daughter, Lily, on her knee. The little girl was wearing a pink dress with a juice stain on the collar. My parents sat across from them in matching recliners they had bought on sale 10 years ago, the fabric worn thin on the armrests. I sat on the folding chair they kept in the corner for when there wasn't enough room, the one with the wobbly leg that made me feel like I might tip over if I leaned too far to one side. My mother spoke first. She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture I recognized from childhood, the one she used when she was about to say something she thought I wouldn't like. She said, "Jordan, we need to talk about your business." I looked up from my phone. I had been checking an email from a client who wanted revisions on a logo design, the third round of changes, on a project that was supposed to be finished 2 weeks ago. I said, "What about it?" My father leaned forward. His face was serious, the deep lines around his mouth more pronounced than I remembered. His voice was steady, the way it always was when he had already made up his mind about something and was not interested in debate. He said, "Michael is struggling. He has 3 kids to feed. Amanda cannot work because someone has to watch the little ones and daycare costs more than she would make anyway. You're doing well. You have that studio. You do not have a family to support. It makes sense for you to help." I blinked. I set my phone down on my lap. I said, "Help how?" My mother glanced at Michael. Michael looked at the floor, his jaw tight, his hands clasped together so hard his knuckles were white. She said, "We think you should give the business to Michael. He could run it. He has sales experience. He knows how to talk to people, how to close deals. You could work for him if you wanted, or you could find something else. But the business should go to him. He needs it more than you do." The words landed like stones in my chest, heavy and cold. I stared at her, waiting for the joke, the laugh, the moment when someone would admit this was not real, that they were testing me or playing some kind of prank I didn't understand. But nobody laughed. My father nodded, agreeing with her. Michael said nothing, but his jaw was tight and his eyes stayed fixed on the carpet. Amanda looked away, her face pale, her arms wrapped protectively around Lily. I said, "You want me to give him my business?" My father said, "We are not asking you to give it away for nothing. He would pay you eventually once he gets on his feet, once the business starts making real money under his management. But right now he needs it. You can start over. You are young. You do not have kids depending on you. You do not have a mortgage. You can rebuild." I felt something cold settle in my stomach, spreading through my chest like ice water. I said, "I built that business from scratch. I worked 80-hour weeks for years. I slept on that office floor more times than I can count because I could not afford the gas to drive home and back. I ate vending machine snacks for dinner. I turned down jobs that paid more because I believed in what I was building. You want me to just hand it over?" My father's face hardened. The warmth that had been there moments ago vanished, replaced by something sharp and final. He said, "Give it to him or don't call yourself our son." The room went silent. Even the baby stopped making noise. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, a car drove past. My mother looked at my father like she wanted to say something, but could not find the words. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Michael finally looked at me, and for a second I thought I saw guilt in his eyes, a flicker of shame or regret. But then he looked away again, his gaze dropping back to the floor. And I realized he was not going to speak up. He was going to let this happen. He was going to sit there and let them demand my business, my work, my life. And he was not going to say a single word in my defense. I stood up. I didn't say anything. I picked up my keys from the side table, the small wooden bowl where my mother always put them when I arrived. I walked to the door. My mother called after me, her voice shaky, rising in pitch. She said, "Jordan, do not leave like this. We can talk about it. We can figure something out." But I was already gone. I got in my car and sat in the driveway for 10 minutes staring at the steering wheel. My hands were shaking. I didn't cry. I just sat there replaying the words in my head over and over like a song I could not turn off. Give it to him or don't call yourself our son. The ultimatum hung in the air around me, suffocating. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows from the streetlight outside shift across the plaster. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional sound of someone walking past in the hallway. I replayed the conversation over and over, dissecting every word, every pause, every look. The worst part was not the demand itself. It was the certainty in their voices. The way they looked at me like it was already decided, like my opinion didn't matter, like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. Like 8 years of work meant nothing because I didn't have kids. Like my life was worth less because I hadn't followed the path they wanted for me. I thought about all the times I had helped Michael. The time I lent him $2,000 for car repairs after he rear-ended someone at a stoplight and his insurance deductible was too high. He never paid me back. He said he would. Said he just needed a few months to get caught up. But the months turned into years and eventually I stopped asking. The time I designed his company logo for free because he said he couldn't afford to hire anyone and he needed it to look professional for a presentation. I spent 3 days on it, going through revision after revision until he was satisfied. He never thanked me. The time I babysat his kids for a weekend so he and Amanda could take a trip to the coast, their first vacation in years. I fed them, played games with them, put them to bed, and never asked for anything in return except maybe a text to let me know they got home safe. I thought about the birthdays my parents forgot. Not all of them, but enough. The year I turned 16, and nobody mentioned it until 3 days later when my mother saw the date on the calendar and apologized, saying she had been busy with Michael's college applications. The year I turned 25 and they sent a card a week late with a gift card to a restaurant I had never heard of. I thought about the graduations they missed. The high school ceremony where I gave a speech and they didn't come because Michael had a baseball game the same day. The college graduation where they showed up late and left early because Michael was moving into a new apartment and needed help. I thought about being 12 years old and watching my father teach Michael how to change a tire in the driveway. I sat on the porch steps alone, waiting for my turn, waiting for him to call me over and show me too. But he never did. When they finished, they went inside and I stayed outside, staring at the jacks and wrenches scattered on the concrete, wondering why I was never invited, wondering what I had done wrong, wondering if I would ever be enough. I got out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and made coffee. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the stove. I sat at my small table, the one I had bought at IKEA when I first moved into the apartment, and started writing. I pulled out a notebook and wrote down every expense I had covered for Michael over the past 6 years. Rent payments when he was short, usually $200 or $300 at a time. Grocery money when Amanda called me crying because there was nothing in the fridge, and the kids were asking for snacks she couldn't provide. Utility bills when the electricity was about to be shut off. Car insurance premiums. Daycare fees for Tyler and Connor when Amanda got a part-time job that lasted exactly 2 months before she quit because the cost of care ate up her entire paycheck. I added it up. The total came to $63,000. $63,000 I had quietly transferred to his account or paid directly on his behalf. Never asking for repayment, never expecting acknowledgement, never telling anyone because I thought that was what family did. I thought I was helping. I thought I was being a good brother. I pulled up my bank records on my laptop. The screen glowed in the darkness, casting blue light across the table. I printed every transaction. Page after page came out of my printer, the sound loud in the silent apartment. I highlighted the ones that went to Michael with a yellow marker. There were so many more than I had realized when I was just sending the money, just trying to help, just trying to keep the peace. I put them in a folder. I labeled it Family Support in black marker. I set the folder on my desk and stared at it. My chest felt tight. My throat felt raw, even though I had not said a word out loud since I left my parents' house. By the time the sun came up, casting pale orange light through the blinds, I knew what I had to do. I was not going to hand over my business. I was not going to let them take what I had built, what I had sacrificed for, what I had bled for. But I was also not going to fight them. I was not going to argue or explain or beg them to see reason, because people who do not want to see will never see, no matter how much evidence you put in front of them. I was going to do something else. Something quiet. Something final. Something they would never see coming. I met with my business partner, Elena, the next morning. She and I had worked together since the second year the studio opened. She handled client relations, project management, invoicing, and all the administrative work that I hated doing. I focused on design, creative direction, and building relationships with the clients who paid the bills. We trusted each other completely. She knew my family situation was complicated. Knew my parents had been difficult, but I had never told her the full story. I told her now. We sat in a corner booth at the coffee shop we always went to before big meetings. The one with the mismatched chairs and the chalkboard menu that changed every week. The smell of fresh espresso and cinnamon rolls filled the air. Elena ordered a latte. I ordered black coffee. Too tired to care about taste. She listened without interrupting, her dark eyes focused on my face, her expression growing tighter with every detail. When I finished, she set down her coffee cup carefully, like she was afraid she might throw it if she wasn't careful. She said, "They want you to give away the business you built so your brother can play boss? Are they insane?" I nodded. I said, "My father gave me an ultimatum. Give it to Michael or I am not his son anymore." Elena leaned back in her chair. She ran a hand through her short black hair, a habit she had when she was thinking hard about something. She said, "What are you going to do?" I looked out the window. The street was busy with morning traffic, people rushing to jobs they probably hated, living lives they probably didn't choose. I said, "I want to sell the business to you." She blinked. She said, "What?" I said, "You have been with me since the beginning. You know every client, every project, every system. You care about this place as much as I do. I want to sell it to you at fair market value. We will get it appraised, do everything legally, make it clean, but I need it to happen fast before they show up expecting to take over." Elena stared at me for a long moment. Then she said, "How fast?" I said, 3 days. She took a deep breath. She said, "That is insane." I said, "I know." She said, "Okay, let me make some calls." And just like that, the plan was in motion. We spent the rest of the day calling appraisers, lawyers, accountants. We pulled financial records, client contracts, lease agreements. Everything needed to be documented. Everything needed to be legal and airtight, so there was no room for anyone to claim fraud or coercion. Elena had savings. She also had investors who had been asking her for years if she wanted to start her own firm. She made calls. She explained the situation without going into personal details. By the end of the day, she had the money lined up. The appraisal came back the next morning. The studio was worth $420,000, accounting for client contracts, equipment, reputation, and projected revenue. It was more than I expected. Elena agreed to the price without hesitation. We signed papers in a lawyer's office that smelled like old books and furniture polish. The lawyer, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, walked us through every document. She explained what each one meant, what rights we were transferring, what obligations remained. I signed my name so many times my hand cramped. When it was done, when the business officially belonged to Elena and the money was transferred to my account, I felt something strange. Not relief, not exactly. Not sadness either. It was more like the feeling you get when you set down something heavy you have been carrying for too long. Your arms ache, your shoulders hurt, but you can finally breathe. Elena looked at me across the table. She said, "What are you going to do now?" I said, "I am going to wait." She said, "For what?" I said, "For them to show up expecting to take over." She smiled, a small grim smile that told me she understood exactly what was about to happen. She said, "I will be there." They showed up 3 days later, exactly when I thought they would. I was sitting at the desk that used to be mine, drinking coffee and pretending to look through files, even though there was nothing left for me to look through. Elena sat across from me, calm and composed, her laptop open in front of her. We had practiced this moment. We knew what we were going to say. We knew how they would react. The door opened. My father walked in first, followed by my mother, then Michael. Amanda was not with them. I wondered if she knew what they were doing, if she had tried to stop them, if she felt as sick about this as I did. My father looked around the studio like he was inspecting property he already owned. He said, "Good. You are here. We need to start the transfer paperwork." I didn't stand up. I said, "Transfer paperwork for what?" My father frowned. He said, "For the business. We talked about this. You are giving it to Michael." I said, "No, I am not." Michael stepped forward. He said, "Jordan, come on. Do not make this harder than it has to be. Mom and Dad are right. I need this. You can find something else." I looked at him. I looked at the brother I had helped for years. The brother I had covered for. The brother I had loved despite everything. I said, "I did find something else. I sold the business." The room went silent. My mother's face went pale. My father's face turned red. Michael said, "What?" Elena spoke for the first time. She said, "Jordan sold the business to me 3 days ago. I am the legal owner now. All the paperwork is filed with the state. All the clients have been notified. If you would like to see the documentation, I can provide it." My father took a step toward the desk. His voice was loud, louder than I had ever heard it. He said, "You had no right to do that. That business belongs to this family." I stood up. Then I looked him in the eye. I said, "That business belonged to me. I built it. I paid for it. I worked for it. You do not get to decide what happens to it just because you think Michael deserves it more." My mother started crying. She said, "How could you do this to us? How could you betray your own family?" I felt something snap inside me. I reached into the bag at my feet and pulled out the folder, the one labeled Family Support. I set it on the desk between us. I said, "I want you to look at this." My father opened the folder. His face changed as he flipped through the pages, seeing the highlighted transactions, seeing the total at the bottom. $63,000. My mother looked over his shoulder, her hand covering her mouth. I said, "For 6 years I have been paying Michael's bills, his rent, his groceries, his car insurance, his kids' daycare. $63,000. I never asked for it back. I never told anyone. I thought I was helping, but now I know the truth." Michael's face went white. He said, "Jordan, I can explain." I said, "Explain what?" "Explain how you took my money and then let Mom and Dad demand I give you my business? Explain how you sat there and said nothing while Dad told me I was not his son if I did not hand over everything I work for." My father said, "We did not know you were helping him. He said he was managing." I laughed. It was a bitter sound. I said, "He was managing with my money. And now you want me to give him more?" I picked up my bag. Elena stood up beside me. I said, "I am done. I am done being the backup plan. I am done being the ATM. I am done being the son you only remember when you need something. The business is sold. The money is mine. And as of right now, I'm cutting off every payment I have been making to Michael. If he has a family to support, then he can support them himself." My mother reached for me. She said, "Jordan, please." But I was already walking toward the door. Elena followed behind us. I heard Michael start to argue, his voice rising, panic setting in as he realized what I had just done. I heard my father yelling. I heard my mother sobbing. I did not look back. The call started that night. First my mother, her voice shaking, begging me to reconsider. Then my father, his voice cold and hard, telling me I was making a mistake I would regret. Then Michael, his voice desperate, asking me how he was supposed to feed his kids now that I had cut him off. I didn't answer any of them. I let the calls go to voicemail. I sat on my couch with a glass of whiskey and listened to the messages pile up, each one more frantic than the last. But I did answer one call. It came 2 days later from Amanda. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. She said, "Jordan, I need to know something. Is it true? Have you been paying our bills for 6 years?" I said, "Yes." She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I did not know. Michael told me he was working. He told me the money was coming from his job." I closed my eyes. I said, "I am sorry, Amanda. I thought you knew. I thought you both knew." She said, "Where was the money really going? If you were paying our bills, where was his paycheck going?" I hesitated. Then I said, "I do not know. You would have to ask him." But I did know. I had known for a while, even though I did not want to admit it. I had seen the credit card statements Michael left out once when I was at his house. I had seen the charges from casinos, from online betting sites, from poker games. I had not said anything because it was not my place, because I thought maybe he would stop, because I thought maybe I was wrong. Amanda said, "Thank you for telling me the truth." She hung up. I sat there holding the phone, feeling sick. 3 days later, Michael showed up at my apartment and he looked terrible. His eyes were red. His clothes were wrinkled. He pounded on the door until I opened it. He said, "You ruined my life." I said, "I ruined your life? I paid your bills for 6 years." He said, "Amanda is filing for divorce. She found out about the gambling. She found out I have been lying to her for years. She is taking the kids. I have nothing left. And it is your fault." I stared at him. I said, "It is my fault that you gambled away your paychecks? It is my fault that you lied to your wife? It is my fault that you let Mom and Dad pressure me into giving you my business instead of standing up for me?" He didn't have an answer. He just stood there, his hands shaking, his face twisted with anger and desperation. He said, "I am your brother." I said, "I know. And I loved you. I helped you. I covered for you. I gave you everything I could. But I am done now. I am done being the person you use. I am done being the person you take from. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them." I closed the door. He stood outside for a few minutes yelling, pounding on the door, begging me to open it. Then he left. I heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. I sat on the floor with my back against the door and finally let myself cry. I didn't hear from my parents for 2 weeks. Then my mother called. Her voice was different this time, smaller, defeated. She said, "Jordan, can you come over? We need to talk." I almost said, no. I almost hung up and blocked the number and moved on with my life. But something in her voice made me pause. I said, "Fine, I will be there in an hour." When I arrived, the house looked different. The lawn was overgrown. The mailbox was stuffed with envelopes. My father answered the door. He looked older than I remembered, his face lined with stress and exhaustion. He didn't say anything. He just stepped aside and let me in. My mother sat at the kitchen table. She had papers spread out in front of her, bills and notices and documents I couldn't read from where I stood. She said, "Sit down." I sat. I waited. My father sat down across from me. He said, "Michael is in bad shape." Amanda took the kids and moved in with her parents. She filed a restraining order. He cannot see them until he goes to counseling and proves he is not gambling anymore. He lost his job. He is living in a motel. I didn't say anything. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I just felt tired. My mother said, "We have been helping him, paying for the motel, paying for food, but we cannot keep doing it. We do not have enough money. We thought maybe you could help." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. I said, "You want me to help him again after everything?" My father said, "He is your brother." I said, "And I was your son, but you told me I was not. Remember, you told me not to call myself your son if I did not give Michael my business. So I am not your son, and Michael is not my problem." My mother started crying again. She said, "Well, we were wrong. We should not have asked you to do that. We should not have said those things, but please, Jordan, he needs help." I looked at the papers on the table. I saw the eviction notice for Michael's apartment, the one he had before the motel. I saw the credit card statements with balances in the thousands. I saw the loan documents he had signed, loans he couldn't pay back. I saw the wreckage of a life built on lies and entitlement and the assumption that someone would always be there to clean up the mess. I stood up. I said, "I am not going to help him. I'm not going to give him money. I'm not going to bail him out. He made his choices. You made your choices. And now you all get to deal with the consequences." My father said, "If you walk out that door, you are not welcome back." I said, "Good, because I was never welcome here to begin with." I left. I walked to my car. I drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. The next month, I heard from Elena that my parents were selling the house. They couldn't afford the mortgage now that they were supporting Michael. They were downsizing to a small condo on the other side of town. Michael eventually got into a program for gambling addiction. He got a job at a call center. He sent me an email apologizing for everything, asking if we could talk. I didn't respond. Amanda reached out once, thanking me for being honest with her. She said the kids were doing better. She said she was doing better. She said she hoped I was too. I told her I was. I meant it. 6 months after I sold the business, I moved to a new city 3 hours away. I got a job at a design firm that respected my work and paid me well. I rented a small apartment with big windows that let in morning light. I started going to therapy to work through the years of feeling invisible. The years of being taken for granted. The years of believing that my worth was tied to how much I could give. I didn't speak to my parents. I didn't speak to Michael. I blocked their numbers. I deleted their emails without reading them. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to reach out. Days when I missed the idea of family, even though the reality had never matched the idea. But I didn't reach out. I knew that going back would mean falling into the same patterns, the same expectations, the same cycle of giving until there was nothing left of me. Elena and I stayed in touch. The studio was doing better than ever under her leadership. She sent me updates, pictures of new projects, stories about difficult clients. She asked if I wanted to come back and visit. I told her maybe someday, but not yet. The wound was still too fresh. I made new friends. I started dating again slowly, carefully, with people who saw me as a person rather than a resource. I learned to say no without guilt. I learned to set boundaries without apologizing. I learned that family is not just the people you are born to. Family is the people who choose you, who respect you, who show up for you the way you showed up for them. One evening, I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee and watched the sunset over the city. The sky was orange and pink and purple, colors bleeding into each other like watercolor paint. I thought about the studio. I thought about the years I spent building it, the pride I felt every time a client came back with another project, the satisfaction of creating something from nothing. I thought about how much it hurt to let it go, but I also thought about how much lighter I felt now, how much freer. I had walked away from the business. But I had also walked away from the weight of being the dependable one, the invisible one, the one who was expected to sacrifice everything without complaint. I had walked away from a version of myself that I didn't want to be anymore. I didn't know what the future would hold. I didn't know if my family would ever understand what they had done, if they would ever apologize in a way that mattered, if we would ever repair the damage. I didn't know if I even wanted to try. But I knew that I was okay. I knew that I had done the right thing even if it hurt. Even if it cost me the family I thought I had. I finished my coffee. I went inside. I closed the door behind me. And for the first time in my life I felt like I was home.